What's up, Rezlife students? It's Blake from Rezlife West, and we are continuing our series about heroes of the Old Testament. We've talked about a few key people in the Old Testament so far, and today we're talking about a man named David. David's got a really interesting story that is filled with things like slaying a really tall person, the whole David and Goliath story, being a king, going into battle. Much of the Psalms was written by David. He also wasn't someone who was perfect. He also made poor choices. And if you want to recap that, check out the classic Veggie Tales, King George and the Rubber Ducky. It's great. But today we're looking at another story. One of the things I find most fascinating about David is that before he becomes a warrior, a king, a leader, a writer, he was pretty average. There really wasn't anything special about him. Let's backtrack for a second. Here's a little bit of the history of what's going on. The people of Israel, they're looking for a king. There's a guy named Samuel, and he is told by God to go to the family of Jesse to look at his sons and find a new king. Jesse has 8 sons, and David, out of all of them, is the youngest. Listen to the part of the story about Samuel trying to pick the next king out of Jesse's sons. This is what it says. When they arrived, Samuel looked at Eliab and thought, "That must be the Lord's anointed right in front." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Have no regard for his appearance or stature, because I haven't selected him." God doesn't look at things like humans do. Humans see only what is visible to the eyes, but the Lord sees into the heart. Jesse presented 7 of his sons to Samuel. But Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord hasn't picked any of these." Then Samuel said to Jesse, "Is that all your boys?" "There is still the youngest one," Jesse answered, "but he's out keeping the sheep." "Send for him," Samuel told Jesse, "because we can't proceed until he gets here." So Jesse sent and brought him in. He was reddish brown and had beautiful eyes and was good looking. The Lord said, "That's the one. Go anoint him." So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him right there in front of his brothers. The Lord's Spirit came over David from that point forward. So put yourself in David's shoes for a second. Someone with a lot of power comes to your house and says, "One of you will be king." Do you think David thought him being the youngest one out of everyone there would be the one selected? I mean, I don't think so. His own dad didn't even consider him and gave Samuel 7 other brothers before even considering David. I think that kind of hurts. But Samuel sees past that, and Samuel listens to God in that moment. And in the end, God chose the unlikely brother out of all of them. Some of them might have even been taller or stronger or wiser, but God chose the unlikely person out of that group to be the next king. What's your criteria for following someone? I mean, when you choose to follow a leader, do you have a list of things that you think they should represent? Like good character, maybe being kind, confident? Or have you ever had to select people to be on your team for something, and have you thought, all right, I want them because fill in the blank? Most of us have been in situations where we have had to select people to follow or be on our team or just to trust. But have you ever put aside expectations and selected people that might go against the normal rhythm? Have you ever selected people not for being the best at something, but for another reason? What's so powerful about David's story is that it proves God can use anyone. God can use anyone. It's also important to be reminded that God can use anyone to have a strong impact, to be a leader, whether vocal or silent, and make a world-changing impact on things. I'm always amazed by how students like you see the world. A few years ago, I was serving as a youth pastor, and one night a group of students at youth group came up to me and said, "Blake, we are protesting and walking out of school this week." And I said, "What? You're doing what during a school day?" So some context to that story. On February 14th in 2018, there was a school shooting in Parkland, Florida, and 17 people died. And some of the students of that school were so upset, and rightfully so, that had so many school shootings had happened that year that they wanted them to stop. They wanted people to think about the impact school shootings were having on their lives and how they were concerned with gun safety in our country. However, they felt like their voice wasn't being heard, and they didn't know how they could make an impact. So they asked that question: how can we make an impact and be heard about this issue that we care so passionately about? So in thinking about that question, they came up with an idea of walking out of school one day to raise awareness of how upset they were. And a month later, they organized this. The walkout, it wasn't designed to inflict harm or be violent. It was meant to peacefully explain that this matters to students their own age. They ended up going to Twitter, and in a simple tweet, they invited more students to participate in this. There ended up being over 700 locations walking out of school that day on March 27th, and hundreds of thousands of students attended. Maybe you were a part of this. Maybe you remember this happening. I tell this story because sometimes people are told that they don't have a voice. Sometimes people are told that if they weren't picked first, they don't matter as much. But what I've seen from students in Parkland, Florida, is that they found a way for their voice to be heard. And what I have discovered from the story of David is that even the last person picked can have a tremendous effect in the world. Every person has a voice. And if we know that God is calling us to do something, then God wants us to act. David could have totally said no to when God said, "You're the next king." I think he had that option. But he said yes. He even messed up a ton of times in his story and in his life, but he was constantly and faithfully trying to live out his life for God. A verse I'm always reminded about when it comes to trusting that God can use you is 1 Timothy 4:12. It states, "Let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech and in conduct, in love, in faith, in purity." I hear these words proven true through David's story. He didn't let anyone despise him for his youth. I hear these words proven true through the students of Parkland, Florida, in the way they were passionate about setting a positive example. Students, God uses anyone to bring good news to others in this world. And may you be reminded that you too have the ability to be used by God to do big things. All it takes is trusting that God's got you and saying yes to that invitation.